to the best day ever! Are you ready to rumble? Just kidding. I hope you guys are having the best day. We're on week 3 of our online series, The Comeback, where we are learning that our story is not just our story, but it's God's story too. Today's big idea is God helps me. Throughout our lives, we all need a little help from time to time, but what if things kept getting worse and worse and worse, and there's no help in sight? I'm sure that's what today's sports star must have felt like before his big comeback story.
You guys have probably heard of today's athlete, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. You might think of him more as an actor or a singer rather than a sports star, but I want to go back to the very beginning when he played football in college at the University of Miami. He had big dreams of one day becoming an NFL football player when those dreams were crushed because of some terrible injuries. He went all the way to Canada just to get cut from another team. Poor guy. He returned home with very little money and broken dreams. Is that where his story ends? No way. He decided to look at his career differently and reinvent himself into one of the greatest WWE wrestlers of all time. And now he's a huge successful movie star. Now talk about a comeback. I'm sure Dwayne Johnson needed help along the way, just like we do. We need help, especially when the story doesn't come out like we expect it to. No matter how the story looks, we can trust that God helps us.
It's so amazing to think that our story is not just our own, but it's God's story too. He has big plans for every single one of us, and He directs our steps. Now it's time for our Bible story. I love the Bible. It's God's living, breathing word, and it always has something fresh for every single one of us. Today, we're learning about the life of Joseph, starting in Genesis chapter 37. Let's learn about what God has in store for this dreamer.
God's story, Joseph. So part of God's story is about a guy named Joseph, and it begins like this. Once there was a guy named Joseph who had 10 older brothers and one younger one. When Joe was a boy, he was his dad's favorite. In fact, his dad liked him so much better than his brothers that he gave Joe a special gift to prove it. You can imagine this made his brothers jealous. And Joe only made things worse. He told his brothers about dreams he had where he was ruling over them. Well, this made Joe's brothers furious. One day they were working and saw Joe coming. They said, "Here comes that dreamer." They threw Joe into a dark pit. They might have left him there forever, but they met some men traveling from Egypt and sold Joe to them as a servant instead. They thought that was slightly nicer than leaving him in a pit. Then they went home and told their father Joe had been killed by a wild animal. This broke their dad's heart. Kids, these brothers were really bad news. Selling a sibling is never a good idea, ever. But the Bible says the Lord was with Joe. When Joe was a servant, he worked for a really important rich guy named Potiphar. And Potiphar liked Joe so much, he put him in charge of the whole house. Joe was happy until one day he was blamed for something he didn't do, and Potiphar sent him straight to jail. Well, God was still with Joe, even in prison. The guard decided he liked Joe so much, he put him in charge of all the other prisoners. Then God gave Joe special knowledge about dreams. When 2 prisoners had dreams, Joe knew what they meant, so he told them. 2 years later, Egypt's ruler called Pharaoh had a dream, and nobody knew what it meant. But by now, one of the 2 prisoners Joe had helped was out of jail and working for Pharaoh. He told Pharaoh about Joe, and God helped Joe figure out what Pharaoh's dream meant. But Pharaoh's dream was really more of a nightmare. It meant that everybody in Egypt would have food for 7 years, then be hungry for 7 years. Joe told Pharaoh the only way to survive was to store food during the 7 good years. Well, Pharaoh thought Joe's idea was brilliant. He put him in charge. During the 7 hungry years, nobody could eat without getting food from Joe. He was like a human vending machine. Well, remember how Joe had 11 brothers? Like everybody else, they had to get food from Joe. And when they came, they didn't even recognize their brother. But Joe knew who they were. He secretly tested them to see if they changed. After all, they did throw him in a pit and sell him. Finally, he couldn't hide who he was from his brothers anymore. He told everyone to leave the room because he was about to cry. After sobbing for a few minutes, he told them, "I'm your brother Joseph. I'm the one you sold." The brothers couldn't believe it. They had hurt Joe, but God had taken care of him during the good times and the bad. Even with everything they had done to Joe, he forgave them because he was willing to follow God, even when it was hard. Joe told them, "You planned to harm me, but God planned it for good." And God used Joe to save many lives, including the family that was part of God's special rescue plan. And that's the story of Joseph. So in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Joe was his dad's favorite. His brothers sold him. Potiphar put Joe in charge. Joe was sent to jail. The guard put Joe in charge. Pharaoh had a bad dream. Joe told him what it meant. Pharaoh put Joe in charge. Joe's brothers had to come to him for food. Joe forgave them. This was part of God's rescue plan. And that's a part of God's story.
Hey, how's it going?
Whoa.
Sorry.
Scared me there. I was just working on my intimidating wrestling faces.
Oh.
I think I've narrowed it down to about 2.
Okay.
You want to help me out?
I'd love to help you out. Yes.
Okay, so here's the first one.
First one.
And here's the second one. Here's the second one.
Okay. All right, phase 1, phase 2.
Yeah.
You know, I think phase 2 was a little scarier than phase 1.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Thanks for helping out with that because I'm getting ready for my first wrestling match against Pete the Cobra Reynolds, and I sure needed the help.
Yeah, sure. I love to help. You know, that kind of reminds me, we're in the middle of a big series called The Comeback, and we're talking about big comebacks in life. And our big idea is that God helps me. He helps us with big stuff, He helps us with little stuff, and everything in between.
Wow, that is awesome. It's so good to know that God helps us. Wrestling fans, why don't you help us out with today's big idea?
Okay.
Get your most intimidating wrestling face on, and get your most toughest voice, and repeat after me. God helps us.
All right, that felt good. That felt powerful. All right, well, thank you so much, Rex, for all your help today.
Anytime. Time to go defeat the Cobra.
All right, good luck to you, man. Thanks, guys.
No matter what we face in our life, it's so great to know that God helps us in the moments that we need Him the most. God is so good. Now it's time to stand up and worship Him. This would be a great time to think about how good God is and how He helps us.
Into your light, my heart surrenders to your design. You gave me purpose, so I give my life. I'm giving you all of me. Out of the darkness and into your light, my heart surrenders to your design. You gave me purpose, so I give my life. I'm giving you all of me. Forever I will lift my voice. Forever you will be my child.
Today, we're talking about how God helps me, not just in the good times, but also in the bad times and the not so good times. So, have you guys ever had something bad happen to you? Or maybe you had something bad happen to a friend, or somebody that you really, really cared about. You know, we're talking today about how even though bad things happen, God still helps us, that God is still in control. Today, we've been talking about Joseph, and Joseph said something really cool. He told his brothers, "What you meant to harm me, God turned to good, to save a lot of people." So how can we approach whenever bad things happen, have the same thoughts that Joseph did, that even though bad things happen, God helped him through it? The first thing we need to remember is that bad things happen. Bad things happen to good people, bad things happen to everyone. Let's take a look at what John 16:33 says. It says, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." This doesn't tell us that bad things might happen. This isn't telling us that bad things only happen to people who do bad things. It's telling us that bad things will happen, but no matter what, we need to remember that God is in control. Whenever Joseph was sold into slavery, it could have been so easy for him to ignore the fact that God was in control, to believe that God had completely forgot about him. You know, whenever Joseph was in prison for something that he didn't do, it could have been easy for him to think that God wasn't in control. But we need to remember, just like Joseph, God is working behind the scenes. God is absolutely in control. Because if Joseph wasn't sold into slavery, didn't go to jail, he would have never met Pharaoh and saved a whole bunch of people's lives. Now, the last thing we need to remember is that God can use bad things and turn it for good. Joseph's life wasn't always the best. Bad things happened, but God used it for good. And God can do the same thing in our own life. If somebody is sick, if our parents lost their jobs, God can use it for good. So we need to remember that in the good times and in the bad times, God is in control and that God helps me. Can you imagine living the life that Joseph lived with all of those hurtful, horrible things happening to him? It could have been easy for Joseph to choose to be bitter or want to take revenge, but God helped him realize that God is in control and that good things came out of all the bad that happened in his life. One of the best ways that we can remember that God helps me is to remember all the good things that God has done for us. So let's take a few moments and write out some of the good things that God has done for you so we can always remember that God helps me.
It's been so great to be with all of you today at the Assembly Kids Online. We learned so much about how God helped Joseph through the great times and the not so great times. Our prayer for you is that you always remember who to go to when you need help. It's God. God is always there to help you. Let's review our big idea. God helps me. Thanks so much for popping on today. And remember, you're God's kid. He has plans for you. He loves you like crazy, and we do too.